Join me as I face my fears and spend the whole night in the dark to uncover what's really lurking out there. Fear in the dark. It's a universal phenomenon that has intrigued so many people across cultures and ages. We've all experienced it at some point in our lives, and yet, we still can't help but be drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. So, what is it about the dark that really scares us? When it comes to fear in the dark, our minds can be our own worst enemies. Our brains are wired to respond to threats, real or perceived, and in the dark, our imaginations can run wild. For many of us, the dark represents the unknown, and our fear response kicks in to protect us from potential harm. It's a natural response, but one that can also be crippling. I mean, who hasn't lain awake at night, convinced that a monster is lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce? Childhood anxieties can also play a big role in our fear of the dark. Think back to when you were a kid and your parents would turn out the lights, leaving you alone in your bedroom. The creaks and groans of the house would take on a life of their own, and you'd be convinced that someone was hiding under your bed, just waiting to grab your ankles. It's amazing how those early fears can stick with us long into adulthood. Our fear response is also closely tied to our emotional state. When we're stressed, anxious, or feeling vulnerable, our fear of the dark can intensify. It's like our minds are trying to tell us something, but we're not listening. By acknowledging and addressing these underlying emotions, we can begin to break down the walls of fear that surround us. As humans, we have an inherent fear of the unknown, and the dark represents the ultimate unknown. It's a void that our brains struggle to comprehend, and so we fill it with all sorts of terrifying possibilities. But what if I told you that there's more to our fear of the dark than just our imaginations running wild? There are some fascinating theories out there that can help explain why we fear the dark. And today, we're going to explore them. One of the most interesting theories is the evolutionary perspective. You see, our ancestors used to live in a world where predators lurked in the dark, and being afraid of the dark was a matter of life and death. While we may not have to worry about saber-toothed tigers anymore, our brains still retain that primal fear response. It's like our minds are hardwired to be afraid of the dark, even if there's no real threat present. Another theory suggests that our fear of the dark is deeply rooted in cultural influences. Think about all the scary stories and horror movies that feature darkness as a central theme. It's like we're taught to be afraid of the dark from a very young age. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good scary story around a campfire? It's a thrill that's hard to resist, but one that can also have lasting effects on our psyche. I have a friend who's terrified of the dark because of a traumatic experience she had as a child. She's always been fascinated by the supernatural, and one night, she decided to investigate a haunted house in her neighborhood. Let's just say it didn't end well. To this day, she can't stand being in the dark, and I totally get it. Our experiences shape us in ways we can't even imagine, and our fear of the dark is no exception. So what really lurks in the dark? Is it monsters, ghosts, or just our own imaginations? According to experts, the answer is a little more complex than we might think. Our brains are wired to respond to patterns, and in the dark, we're more likely to see patterns that aren't really there. It's like our minds are playing tricks on us, making us believe that there's something lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. Studies have also shown that our fear of the dark can be closely tied to our emotional state. When we're feeling anxious or stressed, our fear response can intensify, making us more likely to see threats where none exist. It's like our minds are trying to tell us something, but we're not listening. But here's the thing, our fear of the dark is incredibly powerful. It can hold us back, keep us up at night, and even affect our relationships. So, what can we do to overcome it? The answer is deceptively simple. We need to face our fears head-on. By acknowledging and addressing the root causes of our fear, we can begin to break down the walls that surround us. So let's recap what we've discussed today. Fear in the dark is a universal phenomenon that's both a psychological phenomenon and a shared human experience. It's a complex mix of evolutionary, cultural, and emotional factors that can be incredibly powerful. But by understanding what really scares us, we can begin to overcome our fears and live more fulfilling lives. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you've got a scary story to share or a personal experience with fear in the dark, please leave it in the comments below. And if you're interested in exploring more topics like this, be sure to check out my other videos on the psychology of fear and anxiety. Until next time, stay curious and don't be afraid of the dark.